it's so common to think of, oh, all of my wisdom comes from my brain and my thoughts. And we ignore the wisdom of our body, and we ignore the signs that our body gives us, right? Anxiety is a sign. Your body's trying to tell you something. Anger is a sign, right? Now, when it gets unmanaged and when we allow our emotional system to run the show, that's a problem. But at the core of it, it's trying to tell you something. And there's a lot of wisdom there.
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Kulian.
Hi, friends. Welcome back. Today, we're talking about a topic that's really, really popular, and not in a good way. That's like infamous, because so many people today are suffering from anxiety. And I'm speaking from experience, because 20 years ago, when I first moved away from home, grew up in a very small town, and people laugh when I tell them this, but there were 26 people in my graduating high school class. And then I moved 2 states away and I went to college, and there were like thousands of people walking around on a campus. And I didn't know it at the time, but I suffered from social anxiety. And so this topic of anxiety is something, I've learned a lot about it with my education, and I've conquered it personally. But it is something that I've experienced. And so when I talk about anxiety, I do speak from a place of, I know how horrible it is to suffer from anxiety and to feel that you don't have control over these feelings and the way that your body feels. And so today I want to share with you 4 steps to reduce anxiety. And as we reduce our anxiety, we're increasing our emotional discipline. And you've probably heard that term emotional discipline before. And it's really something that you'll hear me talk about, because as we move through our self-development journey, what we're really doing is we are increasing our emotional discipline. And that really just means we're managing our emotions. Our emotions are not managing us. And anxiety really is an activation of our emotional network. And so we've talked before about how the way I conceptualize us as humans, people, is a system, right? We're a system, and we have these 3 distinct circuits that are interconnected. We have our physical body, we have our emotional network, and then we have our thinking mind. When we feel anxiety, and also when we lose control of our emotions, they're 2 different experiences, but they're the same essential thing is happening, which is our emotional network is getting lit up. So it's almost like you can see the temperature of it is rising and it's activated. And so when it's activated in the direction of anxiety, it's a very internal experience. So for me, 20 years ago, when I would have to go to a lecture hall, and this was the scariest thing for me, because there were a few hundred people in this space, and we're all there for a lecture, and it was overwhelming. And so my emotional network would start getting activated, and I would know this because I could feel it in my body. And so for me, this is kind of an embarrassing symptom of anxiety, but my hands sweat. And to this day, if I'm uncomfortable or if I'm nervous, I'm getting like emotional activation in the direction of fear or uncertainty, my hands sweat. And I'm not just talking about like, oh, your hands are a little damp. Like, my hands drip. And so for me, when I would go to this particular lecture hall, it was like this one class where there were hundreds of people, and I didn't know anybody. I got to the point where I would bring paper towels in my bag because I'm like, my hands are going to drip with sweat. And I didn't know the word anxiety, let alone understand, like, why is this happening to me? It was just like, there's something wrong with my body, because when I'm in this, in this lecture, my hands are sweating and I have a stomach ache. And it doesn't seem to matter what I had for lunch, because every single day when I'm here, I have a stomach ache and my hands are sweating. So And this is a sign that there's activation in the emotional network. And so we call this anxiety. And so for you, anxiety could be a stomachache and sweaty hands like it was for me, or it could be your heart starts beating faster. And that's another one that I have when I, not so much the anxiety expression, but more of like actual fear or anger. If I'm moving more towards like losing control of my emotions, it's the heart rate, right? You can feel it. It's like, wow, I'm just sitting here, but my heart's racing now. Or maybe your face is starting to feel flushed. It's like, man, I can tell there's heat in my cheeks, right? And you probably all know people, or maybe you are someone who your face can get really red, right? When you start getting this emotional network starts getting charged, your face goes red and the whole world can see like, there's something going on there, right? This anxiety, it's a very internal experience, whereas losing control is an external experience because we allow it out. So let's move through these 4 steps to really gaining the control back. And they're the same steps. And the reason why I'm talking about both anxiety, which is this internal experience, and then also kind of flipping your lid and losing control is because the steps to gain control back are the same. So depending on the day or depending on just, your own emotional network, both of these scenarios are going to be helped with this. Okay, so the first step to reducing anxiety is to observe the feelings that are happening in your body. So for me, back in that lecture hall, it was observing like, okay, my hands are sweating profusely and I have a stomachache. And as you observe, you're going to do something. It's almost like a ninja trick, friends. It sounds like semantics, but it's an actual ninja trick. And I learned about this in the book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which is a wonderful book. But what you're going to do as you're observing these feelings in your body is you're going to step out of the experience and you're going to become the observer of the experience. And it sounds interesting, like, okay, what do you even mean by that? But you step out of being the sweaty hands and the stomachache to noticing the sweaty hands and the stomachache. And you're putting a little space in between you and this experience. Now you're the observer, and the subject that's being observed is your anxiety. It's not you. You're separate from it. You're pulling yourself apart. And it's funny that by making this distance between us and the experience of our activated emotional circuit, by making this distance, we're actually creating more integration with our system. It's interesting to think about, but when we're becoming that observer, we're activating our thinking mind and we're stepping out of just being that emotional circuit. And so this is the first step. So whether you're going into a situation where you start to feel that anxiety building up, or whether you're starting to feel upset about something and maybe you feel anger building up, the first thing to do is to notice the sensations and to take a step back from it. Separate yourself from it. The second step that we're going to move right into as soon as we moved into the space of the observer is to do some intentional breathing. Now, breathing and breath work is also something that's kind of talked about a lot. It's kind of out there. But until you start to use it and understand it, it might just be kind of a fuzzy concept. And so I want to give you 2 options for some breathing that you can do. But there's so many different breathing techniques out there. If you do a quick Google search or if you practice yoga, you probably know a ton of different breathing techniques. But the reason why focusing on breath in an intentional way really works to reduce the activation in your emotional network, which means reduce those feelings of anxiety or anger. So in my case, it would have helped that stomachache get less, and it would have helped my hands to stop sweating because we're using it's integration. we're using our thinking mind. We're focusing on the intention of the breath. We're calming those emotions by doing the breathing because we're actually putting our body into a calm state. And then we're using our body, right? So we're integrating all three circuits of the system to work together to direct our focus towards breath. And it sounds very simple, but when you're in the moment of being taken over by emotional activation, focusing on breath and having a plan and knowing what breath work I'm going to do is incredibly powerful. And it might just be the only 2 steps that you need to manage your anxiety and bring it down to almost nothing. These 2 first steps are incredibly important. So I'm going to share 2 breathing techniques that really help to reduce that anxiety or bring your anger down. The first one, it comes from yoga, and it's an ocean breath or ujjayi breath. And it's really simple. I like to do this one more when I'm alone because there's sound to it. And sometimes in a social setting, you don't really want to be drawing attention to yourself with breath. But let's say you're driving somewhere. So if I was, walking to that class by myself or driving there, this would be a breath that I could do. And so you're simply going to breathe in through your nose, nice long breath, and then you're going to breathe out through your nose. And so it sounds a little bit like the ocean, like the way the waves like kind of come up and then, the waves come into the shore. And so I'm going to do just a couple of them, and you can do this yourself as you're listening. So we breathe in through the nose. And it actually takes a lot of focus and energy. And the way that I work this breath is to picture the ocean. The ocean is such a calming place. And I picture the wave coming in and then crashing up on the shore. So that's one that I do when I'm alone, but one that you can do anywhere. And this is really my go-to that I utilize often. It's called box breath. And so you're simply going to breathe in for 4 counts. You hold your breath for 4. You exhale for 4. And then you hold for 4 again. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And you can do this as well. And you don't have to breathe loud, right? If you're alone, you can, but you can do this completely incognito. But what you're doing, and I love this one because there's counting. Anytime we're counting, anytime you're utilizing your thinking logical brain, you're drawing that attention away from the activation in your emotional network. So instantly you are reducing the charge of your anxiety by using your mind to count. And then you add in the fact that you're breathing, you're using your whole body, and it is just an incredible calming mechanism to just almost like turn the temperature down on that emotional network. And so you can see this works for anger, it works for anxiety. All right, the third thing. Now, these first 2, you do it in the moment. You do it to get through the situation. The third and the fourth, you can do these later. This is more like I want to do the deeper work to prevent myself from experiencing anxiety as often and to prevent myself from, getting angry or upset when it's not appropriate. So the first 2 steps are really like, let's put the fire out. And then the step 3 and 4 is let's prevent this from happening as frequently in the future. So the third step to reducing your anxiety is to look for the source. And so this is where we get back inside into our inner world and we start poking around. The body has wisdom. And I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. I listen to many of his books, but specifically Power of Myth. I listen to that book about 4 times a year on Audible because it's such an incredible experience for me. So I have most of it memorized. But something that he says in that interview is the brain is a secondary organ. Like the consciousness of our head is a secondary organ to the wisdom of our body. And in the Western culture that we exist in over here, like it's so common to think of, oh, all of my wisdom comes from my brain and my thoughts. And we ignore the wisdom of our body, and we ignore the signs that our body gives us, right? Anxiety is a sign. Your body's trying to tell you something. Anger is a sign, right? Now, when it gets unmanaged and when we allow our emotional system to run the show, that's a problem. But at the core of it, it's trying to tell you something. And there's a lot of wisdom there. You know, we refer to our gut or our instincts for a reason, because they're there to guide us. And the more that we get in tune with our internal world and manage it, the more we're able to gain the benefit of it. Again, this is more of a, hey, if I want to prevent myself from having anxiety in the future, I'm going to start poking around inside to figure out, why did I start feeling that way? What was the fear about? What was the source of the uncertainty? And really start to do that work. And then the fourth step, and this is now my favorite step, but I think if you had told me this step 20 years ago, I would have said you're crazy, but is to feel appreciation for all those signs that your body gave you. You know, when you can get to a place of integration where you appreciate the fact that your body gives you these signals in the form of emotional activation, and you have that loving relationship with your internal world where it's just like, you know, having a relationship with another person, right? There's respect, there's acknowledgement, and there's appreciation, right? If we never acknowledged and we didn't respect or appreciate our spouse, it would not be a very good relationship, right? It would be very adversarial. And for a lot of us, our relationship with ourself, with our system, is very adversarial. And so taking your journey to this place where you can feel appreciation for everything that your body tells you, you can honor it, you can acknowledge it, and you can just treat it with love. That is like getting up there in your journey of just reaching a place of self-mastery. All right, so to review, friends, our 4 steps to reducing anxiety and to increase our emotional discipline. First, we observe the feelings and the sensations in our body, and we do not ignore them. We step back and become the observer. The second is to do some intentional breathing. So you can do the ocean breath, you can do a box breathing, or whatever breath you want. Even if you just start counting your breaths and doing deeper breaths, but you're getting that integration between your system and you are calming the activation of your emotional network as you do that. And that just reduces the feeling of that anxiety and gets you through that moment. The third step is looking for the source. Really, like, what is this message that my body was trying to tell me, right? There's something there. Let's dig around. Let's figure it out. Let's get to the source. The fourth step is feeling appreciation for all of the body sensations, for the anxiety, for the anger. And friends, that might sound strange to feel appreciation for these symptoms that are uncomfortable, but this is just you taking the step towards integration of your system and to being just a loving and nurturing leader of your system. You know, that's a beautiful thing. And I know that it's possible, and I believe in you and your journey. Okay, extra credit for the week. Practice a calming breathing technique, whether it's the ocean breath, whether it is a box breathing. Find a breathing technique that you feel comfortable with, and then set 5 minutes a day aside to work on that breath work. Because in the moment of activation, when you're in the lecture hall and you got the stomach ache, or when you're about to go off at somebody, you're not going to fall back on a breathing practice unless it's really, really ingrained in you. So practice that breath. And thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to being back next week with more content. And friends, if you like this channel, if you like this content, please subscribe. Please share it with somebody. Maybe you have a friend who suffers from anxiety and they need some help. Maybe this episode can give them just a few thoughts that can help get them through the next episode and hopefully get them to a place where they don't have that anxiety anymore. So thank you so much. I appreciate every single one of you, and I will be back next week.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Koulian.